Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. The note lay on the marble kitchen counter. The edges curled as if it were laughing at me. I'm done with you and your pathetic life. I emptied the accounts, and this house is sold, by the way. Good luck. The words were written in Greg's sharp, impatient scrawl, the kind of handwriting that had once felt like a signature of importance, confidence. Now, it was nothing more than evidence of his cowardice. I stared at the words, my heartbeat oddly calm. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady as I typed my response. Thanks for the note. I needed it. Then I set the phone down, inhaled deeply and smiled. Because the truth was, Greg had just lost everything. Greg had always been arrogant, always assumed he was the smartest man in the room. He thrived on power, on control, and he thought that by blindsiding me he had won. What he didn't know was that I had been playing my own game for months. 6 months ago, I had stumbled across the first clue, an unfamiliar bank statement. First, I had thought it was a mistake. But the more I looked, the more I realized. Greg had been hiding money. And that was just the beginning. I uncovered offshore accounts, secret properties, a mistress whose designer wardrobe I had unknowingly paid for. He was preparing to leave me long before today, carefully constructing an exit plan that would leave me with nothing. But here's the thing Greg never understood about me. I wasn't the type to sit back and accept defeat. So, while he had spent months thinking he was pulling the strings, I had spent months cutting them. The moment Greg left for his business trip, which I now knew was actually a romantic getaway with his mistress, I sprang into action. First, the accounts. Greg thought he had emptied them, but he had no idea that I had already moved everything before he did. Every last cent had been quietly redirected to accounts in my name only. The offshore accounts he thought were his safety net. Frozen, seized, rendered useless. Then the house. Greg truly believed he had sold it. He had signed the paperwork, shaken hands with realtors, and likely smirked to himself as he imagined me left homeless. But what he didn't know was that I had legally voided the sale before he even attempted to finalize it. The title, the deed, all in my name. Meaning, Greg had nothing. No home, no money, no escape. Hours passed before my phone rang. Greg's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. Once. By the third call I finally answered, keeping my voice cool. Greg. There was a pause, just a second too long. He had expected tears. He had expected rage. What he hadn't expected was my utter calmness. Laura, he breathed, his voice tight with barely contained panic. What the hell did you do? Smiled. What do you mean? My accounts. The money, it's gone. The house. Laura, the sale didn't go through. I checked the records. Your name is still on it. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, savoring every delicious second. I mused. That's interesting. You'd think someone as smart as you would have caught on to that sooner. There was silence. Then the sound of ragged breathing. I could feel it. The moment Greg realized he wasn't the one holding the cards anymore. Laura, he growled. Fix this. Now. I laughed. Actually laughed. Fix this. Oh honey. I didn't break anything. He exhaled sharply, his anger boiling beneath his panic. You think this is funny? I tilted my head. A little. Silence. Then a whisper. You won't get away with this. And that was the moment I knew he was finished. Because Greg had just made one fatal mistake. He had finally realized that I was the one in control. Greg's next move was predictable. He thought he could outmaneuver me. I watched from the comfort of my home as his desperation unraveled in real time. First, he tried calling his bank. Too bad for him. I had already alerted them of fraudulent activity under his name. His accounts were flagged. Transactions declined. Next, he tried his lawyer. That too was useless. Greg's own legal team had already been informed of his financial discrepancies. And then, the best part, Greg tried leaving the country. 'Cause of course he did. It was his last option. Too bad for him. I'd already thought of that too. Greg booked a last-minute flight, his credit card barely scraping together enough to cover the cost. He thought he was being clever, booking a trip to Mexico, hoping to disappear. But what he didn't know, I had orchestrated this. Greg had just walked into my final trap. Because the moment his passport was scanned at the airport, a flag was raised. A warrant had been quietly issued against him for financial fraud. Greg wasn't just leaving the country. He was walking straight into the arms of law enforcement. And the best part, he had no idea. I was sipping a glass of wine when my phone rang again. This time, I answered immediately. Laura. Greg's voice was different now, shattered, broken. I stayed silent, letting him sit in the weight of his own mistakes. Then, after a long pause, he whispered, "Please." I took a slow sip of my wine. Then softly I said, "Thanks for the note, Greg. I needed it." And then hung up. I leaned back on the couch, my phone resting on my thigh, waiting. Greg would be falling apart right now. It's funny, really. He had spent years treating me like an afterthought, a side character in his grand life story. But now, in the span of a few hours, I had become the author of his destruction. His fourth call came in. I picked up, not out of mercy, but because I wanted to hear the panic in his voice. "Laura," he gasped. "Listen to me." The sheer desperation in those words sent a rush of satisfaction through me. "I am listening, Greg." They took me aside at the airport. Security. They asked about my financial records. Something about flagged transactions, potential fraud. "Laura, what did you do?" I traced a finger along the rim of my wine glass, enjoying the delicious pause before I spoke. "I simply let the truth catch up to you. Laura, please, you have to fix this. You don't understand what's happening." I let out a small chuckle. "No, Greg. You don't understand. You thought you were untouchable, that you could steal from me, betray me, leave me with nothing. But you never stopped to think what I was capable of." His breathing turned ragged. "Laura, they're going to..." Blick. Hung up. Greg was no longer my problem. By the time I woke up the next morning, Greg's mistress, Sabrina, had started making noise online. A social media influencer. How original. She had been posting cryptic messages, desperately fishing for sympathy. Some people are so cruel. You trust them, and they ruin your life. How can someone take everything from the person they love? If anyone knows a good lawyer, message me. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She had known exactly what she was doing, parading around on Greg's dime, wearing designer brands I had unknowingly paid for. I took a sip of my coffee, scrolling through her latest post. "I don't even know where Greg is. He's not answering. This is unreal." Oh, sweetie. I knew exactly where Greg was. And so would the world soon. By noon, I got what I had been waiting for. The first news article. Wealthy businessman under investigation for fraud. Gregory Whitmore detained in airport. I nearly laughed out loud. So it had begun. Greg's entire carefully curated image, the polished executive, the charming investor, was shattering in real time. I clicked on the article, scrolling through the delicious details. He had tried to withdraw funds from his offshore accounts before leaving the country, only to discover that the accounts were frozen. The IRS had already flagged his tax inconsistencies. And now Greg was under official financial investigation. He was about to become the most exposed fraud in the business world. And the best part, I had made sure all of it was legal. Greg called again. By now, he wasn't just desperate. He was broken. I answered this time, letting the moment breathe, letting him sit in his own failure. "Laura," his voice cracked. "You won. Okay. You won. Just help me." I let his words hang in the air, savoring every syllable. "And why would I do that, Greg?" He exhaled sharply, frustration cutting through his panic. "Because this isn't just about me anymore. They're coming after everything, my name, my reputation. You don't understand what it's like to have people watching your downfall in real time." Smirk. Actually, Greg, I think I understand perfectly. He let out a breath, a choked, defeated sound. Laura, please. It was the first time I had ever heard him beg. And it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Blick. Hung up. Again. The next 48 hours were nothing short of a masterpiece. Greg's assets were officially frozen. His company issued a public statement. They were cooperating with financial authorities. In other words, they were throwing him to the wolves. His mistress. She started selling the expensive gifts he had given her, trying to make quick cash. His closest friends. Nowhere to be found. Greg had built his entire identity around money, power, and the illusion of invincibility. And now, with all of that stripped away, what was left? Nothing. Just a broken man with nothing to his name. Greg called one last time. This time I answered. I let him breathe in the silence. I let him sit in the weight of his own destruction. And then, softly, calmly, I said, I told you, Greg. You never really knew me. His breathing hitched, as if something inside him finally snapped. Then, in the smallest, most broken whisper, he said, What am I supposed to do now? Smiled. Well, Greg, that's not my problem anymore. And then, I hung up for the last time. Greg had been reduced to nothing. The man who once walked into every room expecting admiration was now a ghost of himself, trapped in a reality he never thought possible. His accounts, frozen. His assets, seized. His reputation, destroyed. And the best part, he had no one left to blame but himself. That morning, I watched the news with my coffee in hand, enjoying every second as the anchors discussed his case. Former businessman Gregory Whitmore officially under investigation for fraud and tax evasion. Authorities confirm potential charges of money laundering. Sources report that Whitmore attempted to flee the country but was stopped at the airport. There it was. My final masterpiece. Greg's mistress, Sabrina, was already trying to salvage what little she had left. I had no idea about Greg's financial dealings. I trusted him. I'm just as shocked as everyone else. Oh please. The world wasn't buying her act, and neither was I. She dumped Greg publicly that afternoon. Posted some dramatic statement about cutting ties with toxic people and starting fresh. Typical. Greg had abandoned me without hesitation. And now he was the one being abandoned. The irony was almost too perfect. I was in the middle of a spa treatment when Greg called again. This time. Answered. Laura, he choked out, his voice hollow. I've lost everything. I sighed, feigning sympathy. Oh, Greg. That must be so hard for you. His breath hitched. Please. Just tell me what to do. There it was. The man who once controlled me, manipulated me, underestimated me, was now begging for guidance. I leaned back in my chair, letting a small smile tug at my lips. You're out of options, Greg. No money. No friends. No reputation. You played yourself. His silence stretched, long, painful, suffocating. Laura, I need your help. I let out a small, deliberate laugh. Funny, I mused. I needed yours once too. And you left me with nothing. He sucked in a shaky breath. I was wrong. Yes, I agreed. You were. Then I hung up. For the final time. The moment I had been waiting for arrived that evening. It was all over the news. Gregory Whitmore officially taken into custody amid ongoing financial investigation. A leaked video surfaced. Greg in a rumpled suit, being led out of a hotel in handcuffs. His face pale with humiliation. It was over. The man who had once walked into every high-rise office like he owned the world was now powerless, exposed and ruined. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city lights. For the first time in years, I was truly free. But I wasn't quite done yet. No, Greg still had one more lesson to learn. I had spent months ensuring his downfall, but now I was going to make sure he could never recover. The following morning, I sent an anonymous tip to a well-known journalist. Inside the email, every single piece of dirt I had on Greg, his fraud, his affair, his hidden accounts, and, of course, a full, detailed account of how he had stolen from me. Within hours, a scathing exposé went live. The man who had it all and lost it. The inside story of Gregory Whitmore's downfall. An anonymous source close to the situation has provided evidence that Whitmore not only defrauded investors but also manipulated and financially abused his ex-wife before attempting to disappear with everything she had. Sources suggest that his own reckless arrogance may have been his downfall. Greg had betrayed me to build his own empire. And now, I had burned that empire to the ground. A few days later, I received an email from Greg. Just a single line. Was any of it real? I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Did he mean our marriage? Did he mean his life before I exposed him? Did he mean his illusion of control? Smirk. Then I typed my response. Was it real for you, Greg? Or was it just another lie you told yourself? And then I hit send. Because I had already moved on. I stood on the balcony of my new home, overlooking the ocean, a fresh breeze curling through my hair. Greg was a ghost of the past now. His name was a cautionary tale in the business world. His money was gone. His power was non-existent. And me. I had everything he tried to take from me. Because Greg thought he was ending my story when he wrote that note. But the truth. That note was just the beginning of his own destruction. And I was finally free. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.